Interesting. When God says something needs to be done,
Are you raising your hand?
send me.
And I think that's probably the biggest thing. Are you raising your hand? Are you volunteering to take responsibility? And I think that there's a lot of us have had different opportunities through our lives where we could have raised our hand.
Right.
We could have volunteered. We could have said, I want to take on that responsibility right now. So I think the big question is whether or not there's been someone at the front of the room, right? Let's say God rather than an authority figure. If we want to hold ourselves to the ultimate authority figure, if he's standing at the front of the classroom
Right.
of life and says that something needs to get done, how many of us are trying not to be seen? Or how many of us are actively putting our hands up and saying, I'll do it? And I think that could be in any facet of life.
Intuition
Right.
is the first thing that sticks out to me.
Sure.
It's almost like the acceptance of duty, and I think that it's something that was said to me before. It was like when a fire breaks out, you have two different types of people. You have some people that run away from it and some people that run towards it to try to put it out. And I think that when you go back to the acceptance of duty, it's almost like in those moments, I remember vividly plenty of moments where somebody says something, a responsibility to be taken. Something in me says, I can do it and I should do it. And I should raise my hand. Whatever halts me from actually raising my hand, sometimes I've done it, seldomly. Other times I wait to either be called on.
Right.
But something in me tells me I want to do that. Right. Now, a lot of times when you're in a group, you may hesitate because you're trying to be over considerate for everyone else, or you might be worried about, little distractions,
Right.
or other reasons that are external to the fact of, like, I think some people are inspired to take action and to, like, propel themselves into
Right.
duty. Like, they're those type of people that they feel convicted, like, I'm someone who should put the flame out. Someone needs help. You see an old lady crossing the street. Some people feel convicted, like, I should pull over and get out and help her. You drive by and you see somebody over there distraught on the side of the road. Some people have that feeling in their stomach that says, pull over, help them out, see what's going on. Now, whatever reason that we choose not to and keep on driving, whatever reason we choose to just sit comfortably in our chair,
Right.
instead of raising our hand, I think is external. And that's a whole different conversation. But that's interesting because it just highlights that when God says something needs to be done, almost figuring out whether you are the one responsible for the doing of it, I think comes in that gut feeling. And just understanding how to listen to it. To say, like, okay, this is not a negotiation, not an opportunity to sit here and negotiate with myself because I'm conflicted. Is probably a signal that I should take action. Right. And so that highlights to me is just trusting intuition more.
Right.
Right.
Well, and a bunch of great points there. And my mind always thinking in metaphors, what I think of instantly is you mentioned a very important word, which is the word duty. Right. And there's also a video game out there, right? It's called Call of Duty.
Right.
Right. Like, are you going to answer the call?
100%.
And I think that's a great metaphor for people to think about. And way back before cell phone days, as we're growing up, where we had a house phone. Right. There was the house phone. Maybe it was on the wall. You had to pull out the big antenna, or you still had a cord growing up, right?
Oh, yeah.
And there were some times where the phone would ring. The phone would ring. The phone would ring. You ever in the house, you got the family there, the phone's ringing. But who's picking up the call? Right. And then you just kind of look at me. You going to get that? You going to get that? You going to get that? And what can happen is that if you got a room full of people, if they know that answering that call comes with a certain amount of responsibility, they might hesitate to pick up the call. So how do we think about that in the context or in the metaphor of our own personal lives? Where are you being called upon and you're not answering the phone? The phone's ringing. The phone's vibrating. God's calling. You're not picking up. And I think that's a great way to consider it. And you said the word that made sense was the word duty. So how many people are not answering the call of their own duty? How many people are answering irrelevant calls? How many people are texting instead of picking up the phone? Right? I've had interactions, and you probably have the same. You ever have someone that is texting you and you just pick up the phone. You're like, all right, let me just call them real quick and find out what the plan is.
Right.
They don't pick up the phone, and then they start texting you back. Just pick up the call.
Facts.
Pick up the call.
Right.
What's the problem?
Yeah.
It's an interesting way to look at it.
It is.
It's a perspective shift.
For sure.
Of what are the things that you're doing to distract yourself from picking up the call.
Big time.
And a lot of times, picking up the call will solve the problem or will get you to where you want to go a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Had you picked up the call, I would have given you all the details for tonight.
Big time.
And we would have been fine.
Big time.
Instead of waiting back and forth for 6 texts to go through about the address.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lesson there for all of us that where is the phone ringing and we're not picking up?
Yep.
Where are we distracting ourselves with games on the phone and distractions on the phone rather than what the phone was intended for as a communication tool? And where are we avoiding when the phone's ringing and we're sending it to voicemail? Don't send God to voicemail.
Mm-hmm. That's a big time. Don't put it off and don't ignore. Right. I think a lot of times we don't necessarily have a certainty on what our duty is, right? Or what's our allotment or what's our assignment. And so if you have a group of people, you have the world of people and you have so many different options, so many directions to go in. Oh, good. So many different directions to go in. All right. How do you know this is for me? That's for them and this is for me. So that when they say, hey, who's responsible for this load over here?
Yeah.
You can raise your hand and say, oh, that's my load, right? Because I'm a bearer of whatever that is.
Yeah.
To understand what your purpose is, right? And 3 things stood out to me from what you were saying is answering the call, responsibility, and God. And so the God part of it is, back to the original statement, when God says something needs to be done, send me. And so everything is back based on the spirit, right? That spiritual knowing of who we are and what we are here to do and what we should be doing. And so almost it's like when God inspires something inside of you, right? If you have the courage to understand that that's essentially being inspired in you for a reason, because that's your assignment, right? So now getting to that method of send me, right? Based on our assignment. So it might not always be when somebody else asks you to take responsibility. There might be the responsibility that we should be taking in our own lives. I know I put myself in that chair a lot. I'm like, well, I know what to do. Right now, my lack of certainty and lack of follow through on it may cause me to sit there and, try to, think critically on it and try to reassess and try to overanalyze, right? But the reality is I know exactly what to do and I'm hesitating because I'm not quite ready to take on the responsibility. And I think a lot of times we're in that seat. We're being inspired. God has spoken to us. He put something on our heart, put something in our spirit, and we call it purpose. I have a purpose, I have a mission in this life. I don't know why my mission is this way. It's very unique to everyone else. But for whatever reason, I have a knowing that this over here is for me. That over there might be for you, but I have something in my spirit is a knowing that this is for me. And a lot of times I think that's the godly assignment on us. And that's very powerful, that scripture. Yeah. Because it's saying this is now giving us instruction on how to respond to that purpose, to that calling, to that knowing. Send me, go towards the fire, right? That's your fire to put out. That's your assignment. Run towards it, right? And just have that mentality of send me, but understanding the power in that is understanding where you need to be sent. Right. So that when you're called, you can go.
Sure.
So that when you're inspired, you can go.
So a couple things is that understanding what your assignment is.
Yeah, for sure.
The biggest word that pops up there is discernment, right? I think that the responsibility of parents is to teach their children how to think.
The teaching, yeah.
Right? Teaching their children how to think from a discernment, from a discernment capacity. It's easy just to say, pick up the phone, pick up the phone, pick up the phone. But if there's a lot of noise and there's multiple phones ringing, which is your phone? I don't know the answer. At the same time, we could pick up the wrong phone. So what we need to do is we need to decipher which phone is ours and when is the right call coming through.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be a little more challenging, right? It reminds me of the movie The Lion King.
Yeah.
Right. So in The Lion King, what happens when Simba's going through it? Right. He's going through it. Tragedy when he's younger. He just kind of lives this unfulfilled, purposeless life.
Right.
Right. Hakuna Matata.
Right.
No worries.
No big deal.
I'm good. Right. He's just living this purposeless life. Then getting to the point where he can never be a king unless he has that battle.
For sure.
Right? Unless he goes through the warrior. He looks into the face of danger, and he has something that he's willing to die for.
For sure.
To be able to say, no. I'm going to go fight for what belongs to me.
Big time.
What God put on this planet for me to have. And that was very important. So in that point, what does he do when he has challenges? He looks up to the sky and he asks his father.
Right.
The metaphor, of course, in that is he's talking to God.
For sure.
He's talking to God.
Big time.
And if he can look up and say, what shall I do? And then he's saying, well, here's the problem over there. This is what's going on over there. This is what your Uncle Scar is doing over there. This is where Rafiki keeps hitting you with his staff talking about. You know, this is what's going on with those hyenas. That seems to be the problem. Then did Simba said, send me, because now I'm ready. And that's the preparation in getting to the point that when the assignment presents itself, right, someone else could have stood up in the place and then taken over the bloodline that was rightfully Simba's. But Simba said, no. That's what's going on. That's the problem. God couldn't step in and strike down Scar, by the way. That's not how it works.
Right.
He needed to inspire one of his children.
Big time.
One of his generals.
Right.
To be able to stand up and say, hey, by the way, I need you to go and fight this. Right? So then he's going to come and he's going to stand in that place and say, you know what? Send me. Now's the time.
Right.
And only then could Simba stand in his kingdom because he fought for it. And I think there's a lot of young men that are on that path right now that don't have anything to fight for. Right? They're not fighting for their name. They're not fighting for their bloodline. They're not fighting for their family. Right? Because they haven't had to. They didn't see that their fathers fight for their family.
Big time.
That was one thing Simba did have. Simba saw the way his father walked and talked and stood up for people, but also, put people in their place when he had to be. He had to take, ownership of the area. So, with that being said, how do you also discern the voice of God? Do you meditate? Do you get quiet? Do you understand when there's a voice whispering in your ear? That is the one you should be listening to. It kind of reminds me, remember the old cartoons way back in the day that you'd have someone just going about their life and there'd be a little angel on their shoulder and a little devil on their shoulder? How wise were those old cartoons? Right?
Oh, super wise.
Right? Because there was wisdom built in them.
Big time.
There was wisdom built in Tom and Jerry.
Big time.
There was wisdom built in, Bugs Bunny.
Oh, yeah.
Because there were little wisdom nuggets in there. And, that's the question, is that you got a little devil on your shoulder and a little angel on your shoulder, and which one are you going to listen to? And when you can decipher the voice of who's saying it, then if there's an assignment put out, are you going to raise your hand and say, send me?
Powerful analogy there, man. I mean, even what stands out to me there is initially Simba fled.
Yep.
You see what I mean?
He ran away.
And you'd say, well, he fled because he was young and he had no idea what was going on. He knew exactly what was going on. Okay. When he was held up, they told him exactly what his assignment was to be as he grew older. Right? Something external happened. They showed him, they told him, his father sat next to him and said, everything that the light touches is your kingdom, and you will govern this kingdom one day. No matter how many people told him, no matter how many people showed him, no matter he looked at his pops who's wearing the crown, no matter none of that, the way he viewed himself didn't manifest until he was able to handle the external distraction of feeling like he failed and let down his father, of feeling like because his father had to come find him, he was the blame or he was at fault for his father's passing. And so that distracted him, distracted the vision of who he was, distracted the confidence and the courage to say, I am king. That is my responsibility. That's my duty. He had to go off. And so a lot of times that's very powerful what you said about the meditation and getting into a space to where you can hear God or where you call on God so you can receive that direction. Because a lot of times we get externally distracted, right? Life happens. There's things that blur our image. And so we can't visually see what we are and who we are and the king we should be or the queens we should be or the powerful individuals we should be because of external distractions. And so sometimes how do you get back? You might have to go on a self-discovery journey, right? You might have to go on your own process to figure out how to clear your head, how to get away from it all, and how to reset and recalibrate so that you can be in the space, silence the noise, silence the distraction, silence the past regrets and the past decisions that we made that we're not proud of, and what we were told we were and who we were told we are and all that type of stuff and all that programming and condition that gets pushed on us without our control and a lot of times without our even understanding. So now we don't even know if we should raise our hand, but that's the powerful part about the calling is because no matter how far Simba ran, he is the naturally next ordained king. And so he can run as far as he can, but there's going to be an unyielding, relentless pressure on his spirit. As long as you run, you're never going to be fulfilled because you are here for this. And that kind of brings me back to the movie Tarzan, right? Tarzan was raised by a tribe full of gorillas, right? No matter what he does, he can adopt their style, he can adopt their language. He's still not a gorilla, but he can take on the image of being a gorilla because that's what he's being influenced around, right? And so a lot of times we are influenced and we take on the image of what brings us up and what raises us. But all in all, we are what we are. And so as long as Simba kept running away from his calling, Rafiki was going to keep smacking him on the head. He was going to keep feeling bothered. He was going to keep wandering, right? Floating away, feeling lost, feeling unpurposeful. But foundation in his spirit, he would never forget the fact that he knew he was supposed to be the king and that he was running. And so the challenges and the tests that he had to face out there in the wilderness is what gave him that confidence and that conviction, and hearing that his father speak to him and just reinforce and reestablish that foundation that, hey man, you can run as far as you can, but your family's waiting on you. Nobody else is going to come save them. Right? This is your calling. This is you. Ain't nobody else going to answer the phone. It's going to keep ringing. You can keep looking around, keep feeling, but something inside of you is telling you that's your phone to answer. As long as you don't answer it, fulfillment is always going to be fleeting. And I think we can take that analogy in life. A lot of times,
completely.
Fulfillment's fleeting for a lot of us.
And a couple of things was, one of the things you started with saying, and I think that this is something that I would say the majority of the population deals with, which is holding on to guilt and shame, right? That's exactly what was going on with Simba. Simba was holding on to this guilt and shame because of what happened to his father based on the domino, the linchpin of him not obeying.
Big time.
You don't obey your father, things can happen. So the amount of guilt and shame that he felt behind that, he was carrying with him.
Right.
That then caused him to run away, right, from who he knew he was. Now, that's number one. Number two is, how many parents out there are doing what they did with Simba and said, you are a prince to be a king, and so to be a king doesn't mean to be served. It means to be of service, which is a big difference. So how many people are even doing that point, right? The reason why then Rafiki could then say, hey, by the way, or Simba could think back and say, this is what I was supposed to be, is because someone told him that in the first place, right? How many of us had that when we were younger? Very, very few. Very few. Very few.
Big time.
Had a parent look at us and say, by the way, you're royalty. No, I don't mean that metaphorically.
Right.
I mean your actual royalty.
Big time.
And because of that, this is the way we conduct ourselves as royalty. And this is our responsibility. This is the responsibility that comes along with the crown, right? And one thing I'd argue, and I think it's a very interesting metaphor, is that a crown is heavy.
Yes, it is.
A crown is heavy.
Yep.
And everyone thinks having that crown on is unbelievably easy.
Right.
And I would argue that the crown is unbelievably heavy. And I think that's why it's absolutely necessary to be in the gym, metaphorically, because if you think that weight of that crown you can handle, having not put in the work to be able to walk around with that type of weight, you might be mistaken. I also think there's an interesting metaphor there for men if they decide to be in a relationship with a woman, where the man is the head and the woman is the neck. That's the metaphor as well, because you need both to hold the weight of the crown. And I think there's an interesting take on that as well. So 3 points. Are people carrying guilt and shame because there's something that they disobeyed when they were at some point in their life? They disobeyed. Right. They're now carrying the guilt and shame behind that.
Big time.
Right, number one. Number two is, are parents instilling at a young age nobility?
Big time.
Nobility and honor. Are you a noble person?
Right.
Are you an honorable person?
Right.
That's what I believe is the word when I think royalty. Right. When I think royalty and I think the idea is nobility, and the whole root of the word nobility is noble. Are you noble? Right. And I think that's a powerful thing where we've put this stigma behind, false idols and idolizing kings, and we've made all these false idols and music stars and athletes. We have all this idolatry everywhere.
Right.
But the question is that how many of them are nobility? And I think that the number would be, or those that are noble aren't always the ones with all the gold and jewelry that are presenting themselves as kings and queens.
Right.
So I think that's an interesting way to look at it. You don't need the jewelry necessarily to prove your nobility. And then number 3 is back to the Lion King. What was it that he had that, had it not presented itself at the time, he would not have been able to accomplish his mission, right? Because we know the guilt and the shame. We know he was running away. We know that he had parents that at least told him he was of noble bloodline. Great. But what was the one thing that had not shown up? He would not, and it wasn't Nala. It was the one thing that needed to show up to guide him through that journey, and it was a sage. It was a sage.
Yep.
And that word, I want to bring back that word.
Oh yeah.
I want to bring back the word sage and what that means.
Oh yeah.
And it was, if he didn't have that sage, if Luke Skywalker didn't have Yoda, right? If Frodo didn't have Gandalf, right? Who were the sages?
Yeah.
I think we have a sage epidemic, and with lack of sages, we can blame the boys all we want.
Right.
We can blame the young men all we want. We can blame the cowboys all we want, but they're just being boys.
Right.
And we're saying to them, what do you want to fight for? And they don't know. And that's the responsibility of the sages, to come in and whack them with the staff over the head. Right. And that, I think, is a very interesting metaphor of the Lion King, to say, okay, wound in boyhood, carrying guilt and shame, rudderless, nothing to fight for, but on the positive side was instilled with this honor and nobility to his name, honor and nobility to his family.
Right.
And then, had the sage not been there with the extra wisdom, things could have been different. Right? He could have just been wandering for the next 30 years.
Big time.
And never reclaimed what was his.
Right.
Right. So that is the importance of sages. I think we overuse the word mentor. When I think the idea of someone that's a sage can bring so much more information. A mentor is someone that can help you go to where you want to go because they've already gone.
Big time.
Right. Here's a mentor. I want to be a CFO of a company. Therefore, I'm going to reach out to CFOs and they can mentor me to help me get to where they are.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's much different for a sage. I think a sage is a much different energy and what can be provided. So again, the question is, where are the sages?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a sage, stand up, figure it out. You know, how do we get
Answer
that
the
back
call.
into it? Answer the call. Phone's ringing off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't answer the call, then you're gonna miss your mission. And nobody wants to miss their mission.
No. Big time. Big time. You know, it's a lot to be said about the parental aspect in that, because it was something very powerful that you said. You said, you know, he needed a sage to direct and guide him. But how many kids right now, or how many children, or how many, children inside, it could be grown adults, right, that still don't truly know who they are, right? Because their parents probably were in the same position.
Yep.
And so at some point in time, whether it's unfortunate or whether it's fortunate, because you have the awareness to know that the buck stops here, right? The train, the cycle of being uninformed about what we are, who we are, and what lineage we come from stops here with me, right? And so if you are in a position where your parents knew and they passed the baton and passed the baton, passed the baton, now you know what race you're running, right? Because you understand where this baton is coming from. But if you don't have that, then maybe it has to start with you. Maybe now you can take ownership of the journey of figuring out, okay, who are we collectively as a family, as a unit? We come from these people. And I always see people running from their parents. They don't want to be their parents, right? And a lot of times we may be looking at our parents in the sight of the things that we don't agree with and the things that we don't like, and maybe some of the worst aspects and components of them as a human, versus looking at the best that they could have been, or the potential of who they could be based on what they are, right? And so a lot of times we shield ourselves from really truly understanding the foundation of who our parents are, because of our own judgment of them, of how we were raised, how we were brought up, or the decisions we've seen them make, instead of taking time to learn who they are, what they are, why they are, so we can understand who we are, what we are, why we are, so then we can go do it. Because a lot of times if they don't know to tell you, now you have to accept either being lost or figuring out on your own. And a big thing that I did once I was in that kind of reestablishing my life phase, I went back and I said, I need to go and learn who my parents are. If one's blue, the other one's yellow, and I'm green, I'm a combination of both of these people. And there's no getting away from that. It's like DNA. I spit something out right now, right? That's me right there, right? That's my DNA. That's my cells, right? That's me. And that's how parents, they created you, come out of somebody's body. And then you say, hey, I don't want to be like my parents. You're doing yourself a disservice. Simba was king. Because Mufasa was king, right? He didn't have another son named, James, right? It's you.
Bernard.
You came out of me, my man.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a very powerful thing to go back, and it starts at the parental foundational level. Yeah. I know I went back and speaking with my father, I looked at him and he has a wealth of knowledge that he doesn't always know where it's inspired from, but he has a knowing. And after getting to know him and diving deep inside of him, and not necessarily looking at my perception of him as a father, more so him as a person, as a human, right? The best of him. I'm like, man, he's a philosopher, right? Philosophy is just the love of wisdom, the love of obtaining knowledge, right? And I was like, he's a philosopher. Okay. But that helped me understand now a little bit why and the way in which I tick. So now I know what books to read. I know what skills to hone in on and advance. I know what to do when I'm out in the wilderness, because for the longest time you might be out in the wilderness trying to figure out how to grow, and you're trying everything, right? But you don't really know what to do.
Yeah.
And you don't always have that sage to tap you on the shoulder and be like, go back home. This is your calling.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you figure it out? A lot of times you do have to figure out, do the groundwork on your creators.
And that, that talks to the amount of wisdom that you needed to be able to get to that point, to be able to have that mature conversation and look at your parents in that lens.
For sure.
Right.
Takes a lot of growth.
Right. You got to a certain point where you were able to remove one lens and you were able to put on another lens. And I think that's the growth of a man as well. Because if you got to a certain point where, the vast majority of children look at their parents through a lens of enamor, right? They can do no wrong, right? That's natural because they're in the position where all of their memories and all that they know is based on this person protecting and providing for me. So it's a certain lens. And the more that we grow and gain a little bit of wisdom as men, there is a point where we could turn a corner, remove that lens of admiration and adoration, and put on another lens of reality that makes us see things we didn't see before, good and bad. Right. And that's okay. Because you can put that lens on and say, okay, let me understand who this person is. And if I can do that, maybe it'll help me understand some of their decisions versus judging their decisions. And I think that that's a very important lesson for men to learn, to be able to when to change glasses, right? When to change glasses. When are you wearing glasses of admiration, adoration?
Right.
When are you wearing glasses of realization? And when are you putting on glasses of possibility, of visualization? Right. That's what I like to call my visualization lens. Right. When you put that lens on, can you walk up to an empty lot and put on your visualization lens and see a building and see what it looks like and see, something that isn't there.
Right.
And I think that's a completely different lens. So back to what we were talking about when it comes to having the conversation with your father, it sounds like you can get to a point, or you got to a point, you remove those glasses of judgment also, right? Because of the emotion that's stirred up in this area.
Right.
Because if you hold someone to a standard that's unrealistic, they are going to disappoint you.
Big time.
It's when, not if.
Right.
Right? Because no one is perfect.
Big time.
But as children, if you ask children about their parents are perfect. So now they become, they become, what word am I looking for? They become less than in their eyes only because of the experiences they've had and the emotions that were churned up because of it. Now, the challenge is to get to that point of you being able to put those glasses on. And I would challenge. I wouldn't hesitate to say that the vast majority, the majority of people, don't even get to that point. They don't get to that point, right? And it's a great place to be able to say, now I can look at my father through this lens.
Oh yeah,
because I've seen enough.
Oh yeah,
to understand that. Now the other blessing that's there is the caliber. I like to use the word caliber. People are always afraid, and everyone's equal, and all this. I disagree. I think there's different caliber of people. And if a person is raised by Mufasa, they have more lessons to go back to.
Yeah.
If a person is raised by a hyena, that's all they know.
Big time.
So the blessing in that is that if you get to the point where you have these people around you that you can start to look at as humans and be able to have the different conversations with them, that's incredible. I think it's more rare than not, and I think that's a challenge in and of itself, right? So, are there enough people out there that have those noble capabilities for you to look up to? And then what can happen is that sometimes you have to find those sages outside of your bloodline.
You do.
So I think that's the metaphor there as well.
Big time.
I think the metaphor is that Yoda wasn't Luke Skywalker's father.
Right.
Right? The story of Star Wars is the exact same story of Lion King. Wounded as a boy, guilt and shame, is kind of running around everywhere, gets his hand cut off.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is that when he needs to go into that warrior stage, he has to come back and have the sage brought into his life. The sage teaches him how to be a warrior the right way. When he's at that point of getting revenge against his father, what does he do?
Yeah.
He has mercy, right? That's the lesson there. What happens when Simba has the point to kill Scar? He has mercy. That's the lesson there. So again, I think it's the exact same journey. And if you can get to that point of being able to seek sages, that's the biggest point. Seek sages. Find sages. They will help you more than a mentor will. And at times, they can even help you more than your family will. If you're not lucky enough to have lions in your family, how are they ever going to teach you to be a lion?
Guidance.
Correct. And you
Mhm.
can be guided by someone that hasn't necessarily been to the exact point that you're going to go, because Rafiki was not a lion.
Nope. At all.
Rafiki was a baboon or whatever he was, right?
Right.
So he didn't have the blood in him to be a lion. He didn't have the muscle to be a lion. He didn't have the drive to be a lion. At the same time, he was able to provide wisdom and guidance for that cub to be able to grow into his power.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's powerful.
That's big time powerful.